The millionaire's daughter was mute, until the old can collector appeared and broke the silence. For years, the girl lived locked inside her own world, without uttering a single word. Not even the greatest specialists could explain the silence that ruled that luxury mansion. But all it took was one simple gesture from that grandmother, ignored by everyone, to make the impossible happen. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and let us know what city you're watching from. And now, back to our story. The morning arrived without an announcement, just like every other one since the day that changed everything. Ethan Miller woke with the familiar weight on his chest, that feeling that something essential was missing, as if the very air in the house had grown thicker, harder to breathe. He got up slowly, his feet touching the cold floor of the bedroom he once shared with Megan. Now her side of the bed remained untouched, the pillows still arranged the way she liked them, as if at any moment she might come back and complain that he'd messed with her things. But Megan wasn't coming back. She had left so suddenly that Ethan still caught himself expecting to hear her laugh coming from the kitchen or her hurried footsteps in the hall. Her departure left a void that no words could describe, a black hole that sucked all the light from the house. And the worst part was seeing the reflection of that absence in their daughter's eyes. Alice was only 7 when it all happened. She had been a vibrant child, full of impossible questions and colorful dreams. She spent her days inventing stories, talking to her toys as if they were old friends, filling the house with her crystal-clear voice. Ethan remembered how she would run to the door when he got home from work, how she'd jump into his arms asking to be thrown in the air, how she'd laugh uncontrollably while Megan pretended she was going to catch her. Now, passing by his daughter's room on the way to the kitchen, Ethan felt his heart clench. Alice was sitting on her bed, staring at the blank wall with an empty expression. She no longer slept peacefully, no longer played, no longer spoke. It was as if, along with her mother, an essential part of her had also departed. The doctors were clear. There was nothing physically wrong. All the tests, all the appointments, all the specialists Ethan could afford came to the same frustrating conclusion. Alice had simply shut down from the inside. Ethan entered the room and knelt beside the bed. Alice continued to stare at the wall as if he weren't there. He reached out and lightly touched her hair, feeling the soft strands between his fingers. Megan used to braid intricate styles into that brown hair, decorating them with colorful ribbons that Alice chose so carefully. Now her hair was just pulled back in a simple, functional, lifeless ponytail. He wanted to say something, anything that could break through that invisible barrier, but the words died in his throat. Ethan was a man used to solving problems, finding solutions, controlling situations. He had built an empire from scratch, turned ideas into prosperous businesses, overcome crises that would have made others give up. But here, faced with his own daughter's silence, he felt completely powerless. There was no business strategy, no financial investment that could bring Alice back. Joanna appeared at the bedroom door, holding a tray with Alice's breakfast. She was a middle-aged woman with tired but kind eyes, who had become an essential part of the household after Megan left. Ethan had hired her to take care of Alice, and Joanna devoted herself to the girl with an infinite patience that he himself could no longer muster. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Joanna said softly, as if afraid of breaking something fragile in the air. Ethan stood up and nodded, walking past her without a word. It wasn't rudeness, but an emotional exhaustion that left him speechless most of the time. He walked down the stairs of the house that now seemed far too large, the rooms echoing a silence that was once filled with voices, laughter, life. The mansion was located in one of New York's most exclusive neighborhoods on the Upper East Side, surrounded by high walls and electronic gates. Ethan had bought the house for Megan, who dreamed of a garden where Alice could play. The garden was there, large and well-manicured, but now it remained deserted, the plants growing neatly under the care of the gardener who came twice a week, but without the joyful presence of the little girl who should have been running among the flowers. As Ethan ate breakfast alone at the large kitchen table, he thought about how quickly everything had changed. 6 months ago, that table was always noisy with conversations, plans for the weekend, arguments about which movie to watch. Now, The silence was so profound, he could hear the wall clock ticking away each passing second. Upstairs, Joanna placed the tray next to Alice and sat on the edge of the bed. "Let's eat a little, sweetie," she said in a gentle voice, picking up a piece of toast and offering it to the girl. Alice took it mechanically, chewed slowly, and swallowed without showing any pleasure or interest. It was an automatic process, as if she had turned into a little robot performing programmed tasks. After breakfast, Joanna helped her get dressed, choosing comfortable and practical clothes. Alice showed no preference for any item, didn't ask to wear her favorite dress or the blouse with the butterfly print she once adored. She accepted what was put on her with the same indifference with which she accepted food. The routine continued like this, day after day, week after week. Ethan would leave for work, trying to focus on meetings and contracts, but his mind always drifted back home to that little girl who seemed to be disappearing even while being physically present. He called Joanna several times a day, asking if there was any change, any sign of improvement. The answer was always the same. Alice was physically fine, but she remained in her silent world. Joanna did her best. She took Alice to the garden, hoping the fresh air and birdsong might awaken something in her. She played music the girl used to love. She offered her favorite toys, the storybooks Megan read every night. But Alice remained apathetic, looking at everything without really seeing anything. Therapists came regularly. Some tried playful approaches using toys and games. Others preferred direct conversation, asking gentle questions that Alice never answered. Some suggested medication, but Ethan resisted the idea, fearing that drugs might push his daughter even further away. A neuropsychologist spent weeks evaluating Alice, administering tests and observing behaviors, only to conclude what everyone already knew. There was no neurological damage, no identifiable disorder within clinical standards. It was grief that had turned into an emotional prison. Ethan felt guilty about so many things. Guilty for not noticing the signs sooner, for not being more present, for dedicating so much to work while Megan took care of everything at home. Guilty for not knowing how to reach his own daughter, now that Megan was no longer there to be the bridge between them. He was a man of numbers, of spreadsheets, of concrete goals. How could he deal with something as abstract as a child's pain? The nights were the worst. Alice slept, but her sleep was restless, interrupted by small whimpers that broke the heart of anyone who heard them. Joanna sometimes spent the entire night by her side, holding her small hand, humming lullabies her own mother used to sing to her as a child. Ethan would stand in the hallway, leaning against the wall, listening to those songs and feeling silent tears run down his face. He tried to remember the last time he had truly hugged his daughter, before everything fell apart. He tried to remember her last laugh, the last "I love you" murmured, in that childish voice that was now silent. The memories were sharp and painful, like shards of glass cutting him from the inside. The days began to blur into a grey, predictable routine. Ethan would wake up, try to talk to Alice, go to work carrying the weight of his helplessness, and come home to the same scene, the little girl sitting, staring into nothingness, existing but not living. Joanna prepared the meals, took care of the house, and kept Alice company with a dedication that went beyond professionalism. There was something maternal in the way she treated the girl, as if she were trying to fill a small part of the void left by Megan, but the void was too immense for anyone to fill. Ethan knew that. Sometimes, in the silence of the night, he would catch himself talking to Megan as if she were still there. He would tell her about Alice, about how hard it was, about how he didn't know what to do. He asked for guidance, for help, for a sign that things would get better. But only silence answered, the same silence that had settled into every corner of that house. It was on one of those grey mornings that something different happened. Joanna was tidying up Alice's room when she noticed the girl had gotten out of bed and walked to the window. It was a rare occurrence. Usually, Alice remained seated or lying down, showing no initiative to do anything. But there she was, standing at the window, looking outside. Joanna approached slowly, careful not to startle her. Alice was watching the street through the slightly parted curtains. Her eyes, which had lost so much of their original sparkle, seemed to be focused on something out there. Joanna followed. The girl's gaze, and saw a figure on the sidewalk across the street. It was an elderly woman, hunched over a rusty metal shopping cart filled with cardboard and cans. Her clothes were simple and worn, her face marked by deep wrinkles that told stories of a difficult life. She pushed the cart slowly, stopping now and then to pick something up from the ground. There was a solitary dignity about her, a quiet persistence in the face of hardship. Joanna didn't think much of it at first. People collecting recyclables were common on the streets of New York, even in wealthy neighborhoods. But then she realized that Alice was still watching, completely still, as if something in that scene had captured her full attention. The old woman moved on, pushing her cart, and disappeared around the corner. Alice remained at the window for a few more minutes before returning to her bed, resuming her usual posture. Joanna mentally noted the moment, finding it curious but not wanting to build hope where there might be nothing but coincidence. The next day, at the same time, Alice went back to the window, and there was the elderly woman again, with her cart, following the same route. Joanna watched more closely this time. There was something peculiar about the way the woman moved, a slowness that seemed deliberate, as if she were on a quest that went beyond simply collecting recyclables. When Ethan got home from work that night, Joanna told him about the incident. He listened with interest, feeling a small spark of hope for the first time in months. If Alice was paying attention to something, anything, maybe there was a crack in the armor of silence that surrounded her. "What do you think caught her attention?" Ethan asked, sitting next to Joanna in the living room. "I'm not sure, Mr. Miller. It might just be a coincidence, but I've never seen Alice get up like that on her own to look at anything." Ethan went up to his daughter's room. Alice was already in bed, her eyes open, staring at the ceiling. He sat on the edge of the bed and just stayed there, watching her small face, searching for any sign of change. Alice didn't move, didn't look at him, but Ethan felt that something was different, something subtle he couldn't quite identify. "Good night, sweetie," he whispered, leaning in to kiss her forehead. Her skin was soft and warm. "Daddy loves you so much, you know that, don't you?" Alice didn't respond, but Ethan had the impression that she had heard, truly heard, his words. It was a strange feeling, too fragile to be called hope, but enough to make his heart beat a little faster. As he walked down the stairs, Ethan thought about the old woman Alice had been watching. Who was she? Why did she pass by the same street every day at the same time? And most importantly, why had her presence provoked a reaction in Alice when nothing else had? Out there, far from that protected mansion, the city pulsed with thousands of intertwined stories. In a distant neighborhood, on the other side of New York, the woman Alice had seen was waking up before dawn in a small, cramped apartment in a rundown building in the Bronx, where apartments were stacked one on top of the other. Her name was Dolores, and she carried her own scars, her own grief that time had not managed to heal. Dolores put on the same clothes as always, hand-washed and air-dried, already faded from so much use. She made some weak coffee on a makeshift stove and chewed on a piece of stale bread while looking at the worn photograph she kept next to the thin mattress that served as her bed. In the photo, a little girl smiled at the camera, with bright eyes and round cheeks. The image was faded, the edges torn, but Dolores guarded it as her most precious treasure. It was all she had left of her granddaughter, the child who had brightened her difficult days and then left, leaving a void that would never be filled. Every day, Dolores took her cart and roamed the city streets, collecting cardboard, bottles, cans. It was hard work for a woman her age, her back always aching, her feet swollen inside her worn-out shoes. But she had to survive, and this was the only way she knew. Her route took her through the rich neighborhoods, where the trash was more generous, where people threw away things that could still be useful. It was in this way, following her daily routine, that Dolores began to pass regularly by the street where Ethan's mansion stood. She knew nothing about the people who lived in those enormous houses, couldn't imagine the pain that existed behind those high walls. To her, they were just more addresses on her route, more places where she might find materials to sell. But something had changed in the last few days. When she passed in front of that specific mansion, Dolores felt an inexplicable urge to slow down, to look up at the second-floor windows. And there, in one of the windows, She saw a little girl standing, looking out. Something about that child's posture touched Dolores deeply. There was a visible loneliness in that small figure, a sadness that Dolores recognized because she carried the same sadness within herself. On the third morning, when she passed the house and saw the girl at the window again, Dolores stopped completely. She let go of the cart for a moment and looked directly at Alice. Without much thought, guided by an instinct she couldn't explain, she raised her hand and waved. Upstairs, Alice saw the gesture, and something inside her, something that had been dormant and locked away, trembled slightly. Her fingers moved before her brain could process the action, and she found herself waving back, a small, hesitant movement, but a real one. Her first voluntary gesture in months. Joanna was folding laundry in the next room when she heard a faint, almost imperceptible sound. It was so subtle that at any other time it would have gone unnoticed, but in that house, shrouded in silence, even the smallest noise echoed loudly. She dropped the clothes and went to Alice's room, finding the girl still at the window, but now with her hand slightly raised, the wave still frozen in the air. Joanna's heart raced. She wasn't sure what she had just witnessed, but something told her it was an important moment, perhaps the first real sign that Alice was still there, somewhere behind that vacant stare. She approached slowly, with the same care one uses when approaching a frightened bird, fearing that any sudden movement might break the spell of that fragile instant. Alice remained at the window for a few more minutes, her eyes fixed on the direction where the old woman had disappeared. When she finally turned around, Joanna noticed something different in her expression. It wasn't exactly a smile, but there was a softness there that hadn't existed before, as if a thin layer of ice had begun to melt. "Did you see someone you know out there, sweetie?" Joanna asked, her voice filled with cautious hope. Alice didn't answer, but she also didn't immediately look away as she usually did. Her eyes met Joanna's for a brief second before she resumed her usual posture, walking back to the bed and sitting down, with the same quietness as always. But Joanna had seen it, had felt that spark, however small. When Ethan arrived that night, Joanna was eager to tell him. He had barely taken off his suit jacket when she began to recount what she had seen, the words tumbling out, mixed with an emotion she was trying to contain. She waved, Mr. Miller. Alice waved back to that old woman. I saw it with my own eyes. It was quick, but it was real. Ethan felt something tighten in his chest, a mix of hope and fear. Hope that there was finally a breakthrough, a way back to his daughter. Fear that it was just a fleeting glimpse, destined to fade as quickly as it had appeared. Are you sure, Joanna? Absolutely sure. Yes, sir, I've never been more sure of anything. In my life. That night, Ethan could barely sleep. He lay in the dark, planning, thinking about how he could use this information, how he could turn that small gesture into something bigger. He needed to understand who that woman was, why her presence had provoked a reaction in Alice. Maybe there was something he could do, some way to facilitate more encounters, to create opportunities for Alice to keep responding. The next morning, Ethan woke up earlier than usual. He had a quick breakfast and asked Joanna to let him know when Alice went to the window. He waited, in his first-floor office, pretending to work on some documents, but his mind was completely focused on the floor above. Around 10 o'clock, Joanna came down the stairs in a hurry. She's at the window, Mr. Miller. He took the steps 2 at a time, controlling his breathing so as not to seem too anxious when he entered the room. Alice was in her expected position, standing at the window, her eyes on the street. Ethan stood beside her, following her gaze. Down below, punctuating the sunny New York morning, was Dolores with her cart. She pushed it slowly, stopping, here and there to pick something up from the ground. When she reached the front of the mansion, she stopped and looked up. Her eyes first met Ethan's, who was momentarily taken aback by the intensity of her gaze. There was a depth there, a whole story contained in those tired eyes. Then Dolores shifted her gaze to Alice, and once again she waved. Ethan felt his daughter's small hand move beside him. Alice slowly raised her arm with an effort that seemed monumental and waved back. This time there was something more in the gesture, a clear intention, a desire for communication that had been absent for so long. Something primal and powerful took over Ethan in that moment. It was the desperate need of a father to do anything, absolutely anything that could bring his daughter back. Without thinking, without planning, he left the room, ran down the stairs, and rushed out to the street. Dolores had already moved a few yards away when Ethan caught up with her. She turned, startled, gripping the handles of her cart tightly, as if afraid he was going to try to take it from her. Ethan saw the fear in her eyes and tried to soften his voice, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Good morning, Mum. Sorry to startle you. I just wanted to talk for a moment." Dolores looked him up and down, sizing him up. She knew his type. Expensive clothes, polished shoes, the posture of someone used to giving orders and being obeyed. Usually men like him didn't stop to talk to people collecting cans on the street, unless it was to complain or shoo them away. "I haven't done anything wrong, mister. I'm just working." I know. It's not about that. It's about my daughter, the little girl in the window." Dolores relaxed her posture slightly but remained on guard. "What about her?" Ethan hesitated, searching for the right words. "She's been going through a very difficult time. My wife, she passed away a few months ago, and my daughter just shut down. She doesn't talk anymore, doesn't play, barely reacts to anything. But when she saw you for the first time in so long, she showed something." She waved back. Dolores felt something stir in her chest. She knew the pain of loss, was intimately familiar with the silence that invades the soul, when something precious is torn away. She looked back at the window where Alice still stood, a small, lonely figure silhouetted against the glass. "I just waved to her," Dolores said, her voice softening. "I didn't know she was going through all that." "And that's exactly what I wanted to ask," Ethan said, feeling he had found an opening. "If you would keep coming by, keep waving. I know it's a lot to ask, but it means so much to my daughter. To me, too." Dolores nodded slowly. "You don't have to ask, mister. I pass by here every day. Anyway, it's part of my route, and if a wave helps the girl, I'm happy to do it." Ethan felt immense relief, but then the need to do more, to ensure this would continue, to have some control over the situation, made him say something that would change everything. "I'd like to compensate you for your time. I can pay you to come here every day at the same time and wave to my daughter. I can pay you well." Dolores's face changed instantly. The softness vanished, replaced by a look of deep offense. She took a step back, gripping her cart tighter. "You think you can buy everything with money, don't you? You think you can turn a heartfelt gesture into another paid service. I'm not your employee, and my wave to that little girl is not for sale." Ethan immediately realized his mistake, but the words were already out, the damage done. "No, I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted to help, to make things easier for you." "You want to make things easier for yourself, not for me. You want to be sure I'll show up like clockwork, something you can control, but I'm not." "The thing, mister, I'm a person with dignity, and I don't need your money to have compassion for a suffering child." She turned the cart sharply and started to walk away, her posture rigid with indignation. Ethan stood frozen on the sidewalk, the words of apology dying in his throat. He watched her disappear around the corner, the sound of the cart echoing down the empty street, and felt a crushing weight fall on his shoulders. He had tried to do what he thought was right, had tried to use the resources he had to help his daughter. But he had ended up offending the only person who had managed to reach Alice in any way. When he went back inside, Joanna was in the foyer, her expression worried. "What happened, Mr. Miller?" "I ruined everything, Joanna. I offered her money and she was offended. Rightfully so." Joanna sighed, shaking her head sadly. "Some things can't be bought, sir, especially not the things that come from the heart." Ethan went up to Alice's room. The girl was still at the window, but now there was something different in her posture. A tension as if she had sensed that something was wrong. He approached and placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the fragility of her small body. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Daddy tried to help but ended up messing things up." Alice didn't answer, but Ethan could have sworn he saw a tear slide down her cheek. Or maybe it was just his own broken heart projecting pain wherever he looked. The days that followed were even harder than before. Dolores did not come back down the street. Ethan hoped she would change her mind, that her route would bring her back naturally. But the days passed and the sidewalk in front of the mansion remained empty at the usual time. Alice went to the window every morning, at the same time waiting. She would stand there, motionless, her eyes scanning the street, searching for the hunched figure with the cart. But Dolores didn't appear. And with each day of frustrated waiting, Ethan felt Alice slipping further away, closing herself off even more. Joanna tried to distract her, taking her to other rooms in the house, offering different activities. But Alice always ended up back at the window, at that observation post where she had experienced a brief moment of connection with the outside world. It was as if she were keeping watch, refusing to give up hope that the old woman would return. Ethan spent his nights awake, replaying his rash decision. He had acted on his instinct to solve problems the only way he knew how, with financial resources. But he had forgotten that not everything in life worked like a business transaction. Some things, the most important things, operated on a different currency. The currency of empathy, respect, and genuine human connection. He thought about going to look for Dolores, but New York City was immense and he didn't even know where she lived. She could be in any of the thousands of neighborhoods that made up the metropolis. Ethan felt completely powerless, once again unable to solve the most important problem of his life. Joanna watched it all with a heavy heart. She saw Ethan consumed by guilt, saw Alice withering in unrequited hope, and she knew she had to do something, but she didn't know what. She was just a caregiver, an employee. What influence could she have in such a delicate situation? But Joanna had grown attached to Alice in a way that went beyond professional duty. She saw in the girl a fragility that awakened all her maternal instincts, instincts she herself had buried long ago after painful experiences in her past. Joanna had never been able to have children of her own, and perhaps that was why she dedicated herself so fiercely to Alice's care. A week passed with no sign of Dolores. Ethan was sitting in his office trying to focus on a financial spreadsheet when Joanna knocked on the door. She entered shyly, her hands clasped in front of her, clearly nervous. "Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you." He gestured for her to sit, sensing the seriousness in her tone. "What is it, Joanna?" She took a deep breath before she began. "I know it's not my place to say this, and I apologize if I'm overstepping, but I can't just stand by and watch Alice fade away like this. Please, go on. You tried to solve the situation the way you're used to, with money, with resources, trying to control the variables. But this situation doesn't work like that. That woman," she felt disrespected. And she was right. "You, without meaning to, treated her like another piece on a chessboard, someone else who could be hired to perform a function." Ethan felt the words like blows, but he knew Joanna was right. "I know that now. But how do I fix it? How do I make her understand that I never meant to offend her?" "Maybe you need to let go of control. Maybe you need to accept that some things can't be forced or bought. You need to trust that if that connection was real, it will find its way back. But for that to happen, you have to stop trying to manipulate the situation." Joanna's words echoed in Ethan's mind for the rest of that day and the days that followed. He realized he had spent his entire life trying to control everything around him, building walls of certainty and predictability. But now he was facing something that couldn't be controlled. His daughter's pain, Dolores's wounded dignity, the longing he felt for Megan. These were forces completely beyond his command. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Dolores was also wrestling with her own demons. She had deliberately changed her route, avoiding that street on the Upper East Side, not out of anger exactly, but because of a sense of disrespect that still stung. She had spent her life being invisible to the city's wealthy, just another anonymous figure pushing a cart. And when someone had finally noticed her, it had been to try to turn her compassion into a commodity. But Dolores couldn't stop thinking about the girl either, about that small, sad figure in the window, so much like her own granddaughter at times. The way Alice had looked at her, the shy wave, it had all touched something deep and painful inside Dolores. She would take out the worn photo of her granddaughter. Every night before bed, looking at that little face that would never grow older, she thought about how different things might have been if someone had reached out to her granddaughter when she needed it most. She thought about how small gestures could mean the difference between being saved and being lost. The overdue rent for her apartment weighed on her conscience. The landlord had shown up, threatening eviction if she didn't pay soon. Dolores worked longer hours, covered greater distances, but the amount she managed to scrape together was never enough. Age made everything harder. Her body complained more. And more. Her bones ached with greater intensity each day. One night, lying on her thin mattress, Dolores admitted to herself the truth she had been avoiding. She wanted to go back. She wanted to see that girl again, wanted to keep waving, wanted to be a part of something good in someone's life. But her pride held her back, the fear of being treated like an object again, like a service rendered for payment. And so the days continued to pass, each one heavier than the last, with Alice at the window waiting for something that never came, Ethan. Consumed by guilt and regret, Joanna watching helplessly as they both suffered, and Dolores pushing her cart through different streets, carrying a burden of sadness that seemed to have no end. 4 broken souls, separated by invisible walls of pride, fear, and misunderstanding, but united by the same desperate need for connection and belonging. Joanna was in the kitchen making breakfast when she heard footsteps on the stairs. It was too early for Ethan, who usually woke up after 7. She turned and found Alice standing in the doorway barefoot, her pajamas wrinkled, her eyes fixed on some distant point. It was rare for the girl to come downstairs alone without being led. "Good morning, sweetie. You're up early today." Alice didn't answer, but walked to the kitchen window and stood there looking out. Joanna dried her hands on her apron and went over, watching the small figure bathed in the faint morning light. There was something agonizing about that silent vigil, as if Alice were waiting for something she couldn't even name. "She'll come back, sweetie," Joanna said softly, though she wasn't sure if it was true. "Things just need time to work themselves out." Alice glanced at Joanna, and in that look was a silent question, a doubt that cut deep. Joanna felt her heart ache. How long could a child wait before giving up completely? In that moment, something inside Joanna snapped into place. She had spent 2 weeks watching this situation deteriorate, seeing Alice fade in frustrated hope, Ethan consumed by guilt, and she knew someone had to do something. If Ethan couldn't, then she would try. After feeding Alice and waiting for Ethan to leave for work, Joanna took the address she had discreetly jotted down from the ID card Dolores kept hanging on her. Cart? It wasn't much, just the name of a recycling center in the South Bronx, but it was a start. She asked a neighbor to watch Alice for a few hours, something she rarely did, and took a bus toward that address. The journey was long, crossing New York from one end to the other, from the tree-lined, quiet streets of the Upper East Side to the denser, noisier areas of the outer boroughs. Joanna watched out the bus window as the city transformed, the large houses giving way to cramped apartment buildings, then to more precarious structures until finally, they reached an area where poverty was impossible to ignore. The center was in a small warehouse, surrounded by piles of recyclable materials. Men and women worked sorting cardboard, plastic, metal, their hands moving with the efficiency of people who had been doing this for years. Joanna entered timidly, feeling out of place in her clean clothes and well-kept shoes. An older man in a faded cap approached her. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm looking for a Ms. Dolores, an older woman who collects materials in the Upper East Side area." The man scratched his graying beard. "Yeah, I know her. She hasn't been around for a few days, changed her route. Do you know where I can find her? It's urgent." He hesitated, sizing Joanna up with experienced eyes. "Don't usually give out info on our people just like that. But if it's really urgent, she lives up in the community a few blocks up. Blue door on a brick building. Anyone up there knows Ms. Dolores." Joanna thanked him and started walking. The streets were narrow, the pavement uneven, the buildings leaning on each other in a precarious balance. Kids ran barefoot through the alleys, their laughter echoing off the brick and concrete walls. The smell of cooking food mixed with the scent of open sewers in some spots. Joanna felt a tightness in her chest, remembering that she herself had come from a place not so different from this before getting her job with Ethan. She asked a woman washing clothes in a basin and was directed to a run-down building that looked like it was barely standing. The door to one of the apartments was ajar, and Joanna knocked lightly on the cracked wood. "Miss Dolores?" There was a movement inside, and then the door, opened completely. Dolores looked surprised to see Joanna there, her eyes widening for a moment before narrowing with suspicion. "You're from the little girl's house, aren't you?" "Yes, I am. My name is Joanna. I'm Alice's caregiver. May I come in?" Dolores hesitated but then stepped aside. Joanna entered the tiny apartment. There was a mattress on the floor, a crate serving as a table, a few belongings scattered about. It was the physical definition of a life stripped down to the essentials. But what caught Joanna's eye was the photograph, framed with makeshift cardboard, placed in a corner, with almost reverential care. "Is that your granddaughter?" Joanna asked softly, pointing to the photo. Dolores looked at the image, her expression softening. She was. She passed away 4 years ago. She was the same age your Alice is now. "I'm so sorry." "Everyone is," Dolores said with a hint of bitterness, "but being sorry doesn't bring anyone back, does it?" Joanna took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "I came here because I need to talk to you about Alice, about what happened. Did your boss send you? Does he want me to start passing by his street again? Is he going to offer me money again?" "No," Joanna said firmly. "He doesn't even know I'm here. I came on my own because I can't stand to see that little girl suffer anymore." Dolores sat on the mattress, her shoulders seeming to carry an invisible weight. "She thinks I abandoned her, is that it?" "I think so. Alice goes to the window every day at the same time and waits. She just stands there looking at the street, searching for you. And when she doesn't find you, something inside her dims a little more." The words hit Dolores like punches. She brought her hands to her face and Joanna saw her shoulders tremble slightly. "It wasn't my fault. That man treated me like I was just another thing he could buy, like my gesture of kindness was merchandise for sale." "I know," Joanna said, sitting beside her. "And he was wrong, completely wrong. But you need to understand that he's a desperate man. He lost his wife. He's losing his daughter bit by bit. And he doesn't know how to handle any of it. He tried to do what he thought would help in the only way he knows how. That doesn't excuse it. No, it doesn't. But it explains it. And sometimes to move forward we need to understand even when we can't excuse." There was a long silence. Dolores wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, taking a deep breath to control her emotions. Joanna waited, knowing there was more to be said, more to be revealed. "You know what's worse?" Dolores said finally. "It's that I want to go back. I want to see that little girl again. But I'm scared. Scared they'll treat me like an employee, like just another name on the payroll. My whole life I've been invisible to people like him. And then for a moment I existed. I mattered. And then I was reduced to a service that could be hired." The words were heavy with a deep pain, with years of social invisibility, of being seen as less than human. Joanna felt her own wounds reopen. She knew what that was like. She had also been treated as a mere function for a long time, until Ethan and Megan had welcomed her differently. "Can I tell you something, Ms. Dolores, something I've never told anyone?" Older woman looked at her, waiting. "I lost someone too, not a granddaughter but a son, a baby who was born too early and didn't survive. And after that, something inside me died too. I spent years just existing, working from house to house, moving without really living, until I came to Mr. Miller's house. And when I met Alice, when I held that little girl in my arms for the first time, something in me woke up, like I'd been given a second chance." Joanna paused, tears now streaming freely. Dolores took her hand, a gesture of comfort between two women who had known the same pain. "And now I'm watching Alice get lost, the same way I got lost after my son passed, and I can't let that happen. I can't. Because if I can help save her, maybe I can save myself too. Do you understand?" Dolores squeezed Joanna's hand tighter. "I do. I understand very well." They sat there for a long time, two women from different worlds, united by the same language of suffering and loss. When they finally stood up, there was something different in the air, a mutual understanding that transcended words. "I'll think about what you said," Dolores promised. "But I can't promise anything. I still have to deal with my own ghosts." Joanna nodded, understanding, but before she left, she looked around the precarious apartment and asked, You're having trouble with the rent, aren't you? I noticed the landlord came by when I was arriving. Dolores sighed. I'm 2 months behind. He threatened to evict me, but I don't know what to do. What I make is barely enough to eat. How much do you need? When Dolores told her the amount, Joanna's heart sank. It was a sum that would be insignificant to Ethan, less than he spent on a single meal at an expensive restaurant, but for Dolores, it was an impossible mountain to climb. I'll see what I can do, Joanna said. I'm not promising anything, but I'll try to help. She returned home with her mind racing. She had touched on something during that conversation, something that went beyond Alice's situation. She had connected with Dolores on a deep level, recognizing in her a kindred spirit, someone who carried similar wounds. When Ethan arrived that night, Joanna was waiting for him. They sat in the living room, and she told him about her visit. Ethan listened in silence, his face shifting through various emotions: surprise, shame, hope, fear. You were very brave, Joanna, braver than I was. It wasn't bravery, Mr. Miller. It was desperation and necessity. What do I do now? How do I fix this? Joanna thought for a moment before answering. You need to go to her. Without money, without offers, without trying to control anything. Just be human. Apologize for real. And let her decide what to do. And what if she doesn't want anything to do with me and Alice? Then you'll have to accept it. But at least you will have tried the right way. Ethan spent that entire night awake, mentally rehearsing what he would say to Dolores. The next morning, he made a decision. He called his office and cancelled all his appointments for the day. He put on simple clothes, leaving his tie and expensive blazer behind, and he asked Joanna to take him to Dolores's apartment. The walk through the Bronx neighborhood was difficult for Ethan, who was used to the comfort of air-conditioned cars and elevators. But he persisted, following Joanna through the narrow streets, feeling the curious stares of residents who rarely saw someone like him there. When they arrived at the building, Dolores was just leaving, pushing her empty cart for another day's work. She stopped when she saw them, her expression immediately hardening. I came to apologize, Ethan said before she could speak. No excuses, no justifications. I was wrong, so wrong. I treated you disrespectfully, and it was unforgivable. Dolores looked at him for a long moment, evaluating. Ethan continued, the words coming with difficulty, heavy with a vulnerability he rarely showed. I've spent my whole life thinking I could solve everything with money, that financial resources were the answer to any problem, but I've learned the hard way that the most important things don't work like that. My daughter doesn't need more expensive doctors or innovative therapies. She needs something I can't buy. She needs real human connection, and you offered that to her genuinely, without asking for anything in return. And I tried to turn it into a business transaction. It was low, it was cruel, it was stupid. His voice broke on the last word. Ethan took a deep breath, blinking back the tears that threatened to Faltani. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm not offering anything. I just wanted you to know that I understand my mistake, and that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Dolores remained silent for so long that Ethan began to think she would simply turn and walk away. But then she spoke, her voice soft but firm. You hurt me, but you also made me realize something. For a long time, I thought my pain was just mine, that I was the only one suffering. But everyone's carrying something, aren't they? Even rich men in big houses have their ghosts. Ethan nodded, unable to speak. Your little girl, Dolores continued, she reminds me of someone I lost and will never get back. And maybe that's why I care. Because when I look at her, I see a chance to do something good, to help someone in a way I couldn't help my own granddaughter. She looked up at the sky, as if searching for strength somewhere beyond that difficult moment. I'll start passing by your street again, not for money, not because you asked, but because I think both that little girl and I need this. We need to believe that there's still kindness possible in this world. Ethan felt the tears finally escape, running down his face without him making any effort to hide them. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. You just have to let things happen naturally, without trying to control everything. He nodded, and in that gesture was a promise, a promise to do things differently, to be different, to allow things to flow without his constant attempts to manipulate outcomes. As they walked back through the neighborhood together, Joanna, Ethan, and Dolores, followed by the curious gazes of the community, something fundamental had shifted. It wasn't a miraculous cure, not an instant happy ending, but it was a beginning, a true beginning, built on a foundation of mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and the understanding that everyone, rich or poor, carries their own pain and needs the same thing: to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity. The sun was still rising when Dolores began her route. There was a different lightness in her step that morning, despite the heavy cart and the bones that always ached. It was as if something inside her had been rearranged, as if pieces long out of alignment had finally found their place. She arrived on the Upper East Side street at her usual time, and when she looked up, she saw Alice already at the window. The girl seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the weeks of frustrated waiting had taken something essential from her. But when her eyes met Dolores's, something happened. A light flickered on in that little face, faint but real, like a candle fighting against the wind. Dolores waved, and this time her gesture was more than a simple movement of the hand. It was a long-distance hug, an apology, a promise that she wouldn't leave again. Alice responded, and her wave also carried multiple meanings: relief, forgiveness, hope. Inside, Joanna witnessed the scene with tear-filled eyes. Ethan, who had woken up early specifically for this moment, stood beside his daughter and saw something he hadn't seen in months: a smile. Small, almost imperceptible, but a true smile on Alice's lips. From that day on, the routine was re-established. Every morning Dolores passed by at her usual time. Sometimes she just waved, other times she would stop for a few minutes, looking up, and Alice would look down, the two of them connected by something that transcended words. Ethan watched from a distance without interfering, keeping the promise he had made to let things flow naturally. The days went by, and subtle changes began to happen. Alice started going down to the garden around the time Dolores usually passed. She would stand there, among the flowers that no one else really tended to anymore, waiting, and when she saw the hunched figure with the cart, her face would light up. One morning, Alice did something unexpected. She walked down the front steps, through the gate that Ethan now always kept open, and went to the sidewalk. Dolores stopped immediately, let go of her cart, and knelt to be at the girl's height. Alice held out her hand, and Dolores took it gently, feeling the small fingers squeeze hers with surprising strength. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding hands, saying nothing because words weren't necessary. Ethan watched from the window, his heart pounding, Joanna beside him with her hands clasped as if in prayer. From that day on, the meeting became part of the routine. Alice would come down, hold Dolores's hand, and sometimes they would walk a little way down the block together. Dolores would tell stories in a low voice about flowers, birds, clouds in the sky. Alice didn't respond, but she listened, and her listening was active, present, alive. Ethan started to get involved too, but differently, not by trying to control or organize, but simply by participating. Sometimes he would go down to the garden when Dolores was there and work in the soil beside them, planting seedlings, pulling weeds. Joanna would make fresh lemonade and bring it out for everyone, and they would sit in the shade of the trees, four souls finding comfort in each other's presence. It was on one of those quiet afternoons that the gate opened and a middle-aged woman walked in, carrying a folder and a serious expression. She identified herself as Laura Sanders, a social worker from the city's Administration for Children's Services, and said she had received a complaint. Ethan's heart went cold. A complaint? About what? He asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Laura looked at Dolores, then at Alice before answering. Someone reported that a minor is being exposed to inappropriate influences. An individual with no professional qualifications is allegedly having regular contact with the child, who apparently has mental health issues. The words fell like stones in a pond, creating ripples of tension. Ethan stood up, ready to defend them, but Joanna placed a hand on his arm. calming him. Dolores remained seated, her expression hardening with the pain of, once again, being seen as inadequate, as a threat. Laura began asking questions about Alice's history, the treatments she had received, the nature of her relationship with Dolores. Ethan answered, struggling to maintain his composure, explaining everything from the beginning, from Megan's passing to Alice's months of silence to the moment Dolores had appeared and provoked the first real reaction in the girl. "And what are this woman's qualifications for working with traumatized children?" Laura asked, her pen poised to take notes. "She doesn't work for me." The voice was small but clear. Everyone turned to Alice, who was standing holding Dolores's hand tightly. "She's my friend." It was the first complete sentence Alice had spoken in months. The impact was so strong that even Laura seemed momentarily disarmed. Ethan felt tears well up in his eyes. Joanna brought a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob, and Dolores squeezed the girl's hand tenderly. Alice continued, the words coming out slowly but firmly. "She doesn't hurt me. She helps me. When she's here, I don't feel so alone." Laura looked at the girl, then at the adults around her, her professional expression softening. She had seen many cases in her career, had learned to distinguish situations of real risk from misunderstandings, and here, in this garden, seeing the way Alice clung to Dolores, seeing the genuine love in the old woman's eyes, seeing the healthy dynamic among all of them, she knew there was no threat. "Can you tell me a little more about your friendship, Alice?" Laura asked, her voice now gentler. Alice looked at Dolores, who gave an encouraging nod. "She waves to me. She tells me stories. She helps me remember that people can be good, like my mom was." The words carried a wisdom that shouldn't belong to such a young child, but that pain had forced her to mature prematurely. Laura closed her folder and knelt in front of Alice. "You're a very special little girl, you know that, and you're surrounded by people who love you very much." She stood up and looked at Ethan. "I'll file a report that the complaint is unfounded, but I strongly recommend that Alice continue with psychological counseling and that this entire situation be monitored. Not because of what I'm seeing here, which is clearly beneficial, but because a child who has been through what she has needs proper support." Ethan nodded vigorously. "We'll do whatever it takes." After Laura left, there was a moment of tense silence, followed by a collective release. Ethan hugged his daughter. Joanna hugged them both, and Dolores stood there, tears running freely down her wrinkled face. Alice pulled away from her father's arms and ran to Dolores, hugging her tightly. "Thank you for staying," the girl whispered. "Thank you for letting me stay," Dolores answered. From that day on, something fundamental changed in the household's dynamic. Ethan suggested they build a small guest house in the back of the property, a space where Dolores could live with dignity. She resisted at first, her pride still present, but Alice asked. She asked with those big, sad eyes, and Dolores couldn't refuse. The house was built, simple but comfortable, with everything Dolores needed. She brought her few belongings, including the photograph of her granddaughter, which now had a place of honor in the small living room. And for the first time in years, Dolores slept in a real bed, in a safe place, without the constant fear of eviction. The months that followed were a time of gradual transformation. Alice began to talk more, first in short, direct sentences, then in longer conversations. Her voice had changed. It carried a seriousness that hadn't existed before her mother's death, but there was also a new strength there, a resilience built through pain. The garden became the center of their shared lives. Dolores taught Alice about plants, about life cycles, about how to care for living things. Ethan learned alongside them, discovering a patience he never knew he had, a pleasure in working with his hands that his corporate job had never provided. Joanna, in turn, found a new family. The wounds of her own past, the loss of the baby who never had a chance to grow, began to heal as she watched Alice flourish. It wasn't a replacement, it never could be, but it was a form of healing, a way of turning pain into love. They named the plants, each one named the represented something. There was hope, a rose bush Ethan planted the day Alice smiled again. There was courage, a lily that Joanna cultivated when she finally managed to talk about her lost son. There was memory, a violet that Dolores dedicated to her granddaughter. And there was renewal, a dogwood sapling that Alice chose herself, symbolizing a new beginning for all of them. The seasons passed. Summer brought abundant flowers and long afternoons in the garden. Autumn painted the leaves gold and taught them about letting go. Winter tested the resilience of the plants and the people. But they all survived. And spring arrived with renewed promises of life and growth. Alice was growing too, not just physically but emotionally. She went back to school, with difficulty at first, but Dolores was always there when she got home, ready with a hug and words of encouragement. Ethan learned to be truly present, not just physically but emotionally, participating in his daughter's life in ways that had once seemed impossible. One day, years after that first wave at the window, Alice was 13. She was walking home from school when she saw a young woman pushing a shopping cart full of recyclables down the street. The woman looked tired, her shoulders slumped under an invisible weight, her eyes empty with lost hope. Alice stopped, watching, and something inside her recognized that pain. She knew what it was like to feel lost, invisible, disconnected from the world. And she also knew the transformative power of a simple gesture. Without hesitating, Alice went inside and got something she had made the week before. A bracelet woven with dried flowers from the garden, the same flowers Dolores had taught her to preserve. She ran back to the street and caught up with the woman. "Excuse me," Alice said, her voice now firm but gentle. The woman turned, surprised and suspicious. Alice held out the bracelet. "This is for you, because everyone deserves something beautiful." The woman looked at the bracelet, then at Alice, and her eyes filled with tears. It was such a small gesture, but it meant so much. It meant being seen, being considered, mattering. She took the bracelet with trembling hands and put it on her wrist. "Thank you. Really, thank you." Alice smiled, and in that smile were echoes of all the people who had helped her get there. Ethan's persistent love, Joanna's tireless dedication, and especially Dolores's simple but profound kindness. When she got home, she found Dolores sitting in the garden, her hands busy with a new seedling. The old woman looked up and saw something in Alice's expression, something that made her smile. "Did you do what I think you did?" Alice sat down beside her. "I learned from the best." Dolores put an arm around the shoulders of the girl who wasn't such a little girl anymore, and together they sat there looking at the garden they had created. Each plant told a story, each flower represented a moment of pain transformed into beauty. Each leaf whispered of possible new beginnings. Ethan got home from work early that day, a change he had implemented in recent years. He no longer worked late every night, no longer put business above everything else. He had learned through the loss and near loss of his daughter what truly mattered. Joanna made dinner, and the four of them sat down at the table together. During the meal, Alice told them about the woman with the cart, about the bracelet, about how it had felt to offer something to someone in need. "You're becoming a wonderful person," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm becoming like the people who raised me," Alice replied, looking around the table at each of the faces that represented her rebuilt family. That night, after Alice had gone to bed, the three adults sat talking in the garden. Dolores looked up at the stars, thinking of her granddaughter, knowing somehow that she would be proud. Joanna thought of her lost baby, feeling peace instead of the usual pain. Ethan thought of Megan, silently thanking her for having loved him and for leaving Alice in his life. The cycle had been completed, but it had also begun anew. The pain that had once threatened to destroy them all had been transformed into something different. It hadn't disappeared, it never would completely, but it had been woven into the very fabric of who they were now. Stronger, more compassionate, more human people. And there, in that garden in New York City, under a starry sky that witnessed countless stories of pain and redemption, 4 souls found what everyone seeks but few find. A place to belong, people to care for, and the deep understanding that sometimes healing doesn't come from grand gestures or complex solutions, but from something as simple and ancient as humanity itself. A wave, an outstretched hand, a heart willing to see and be seen. The years continued to pass. Alice grew up and became a child psychologist, dedicating her life to helping children who suffered traumas similar to what she had experienced. Dolores lived for many more years, always present, always loving, until one day, peacefully and surrounded by love, she closed her eyes for the last time. Ethan learned to cry, to be vulnerable, to love without trying to control. Joanna found the peace she had so long sought, knowing she had made a difference, that she had mattered. And the garden continued to bloom, season after season, each plant a living testament that even from the greatest pain, the most beautiful flowers can grow. End of story. Dear listeners, we hope the story of Ethan, Alice, Joanna, and Dolores has deeply touched your hearts. If you were moved by this journey of loss, love, and new beginnings, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us in the comments which moment resonated with you the most. Every day we bring you intense stories like this one, revealing the deepest side of the human soul. Stories about pain transformed into hope, about loneliness conquered by connection, about how small gestures can change entire lives. Each of these narratives is a reminder that we are never alone in our suffering, and that there is always the possibility of a new beginning. We'll see you in the next episode, with another story that will make you believe in the transformative power of love and human compassion.